When we used our special keyboard to build chords for C major, we wound up with 7 of them. The primary chords were major, the substitute chords were minor. And then there was the runt of the litter, the B diminished chord. Diminished chords don't just show up in C major. They show up in all the major keys, on the 7th degree of the scale. They also show up in the minor keys, and we got even more of them when we raised the 7th degree a step. That trick even gave them a pimply little sidekick in the form of the augmented chord. The problem with a diminished chord is that its root and its top note are not exactly a fifth apart. Sure, on our simplified keyboard they are a fifth apart, and the interval between them is called a fifth. But this is the kind of fifth that has a worm at the bottom of it. If you look on a piano keyboard and count the steps there, you'll see that there are 7 half steps between C and G. In the business, that distance of 7 half steps is called a perfect fifth. But there are only 6 half steps between B and F. Being smaller, it's called a diminished fifth. In olden days, it had an even more evocative name, the devil's chord. To contemporary ears, it may not sound that horrible, but the interval from B to F definitely has a dissonant quality. You can't get rid of it, but there are ways of hiding it, and the way you hide it is by moving the root. Put it in first inversion, and it sounds enough like the 2 chord that you can get away with using it. It's still a little unruly, and in the major keys it doesn't fit the pattern of the other substitute chords, which are all a third down from their equivalent primary chords. Instead, the 7 chord is reached from the other direction. It is up a third from the 5 chord, and in first inversion is a widely used substitute for the 5 chord. Now back to the minor keys. In our first step in a minor key, we had 1 diminished chord. It's positioned at 2 on the scale, but that's not relevant. You can still use it in first inversion. The better news is that here the diminished chord is a well-behaved substitute. Just as the 2 chord is the substitute for 4 in a major key, the first inversion of 2 is the substitute chord for 4 in a minor key. We can also rescue the chords that got messed up when we raised the 7th. The 7th chord is now diminished, but instead of throwing it away, we can put it in first inversion. And, just like in the major chords, the 7 diminished chord in first inversion becomes another substitute for 5. The augmented chord, which in the minor key is built on the 3 chord, is not the same kind of beast as a diminished chord. The diminished chord has a fifth that is smaller than normal. The augmented chord has a fifth that is bigger than normal. But it still sounds strange, and the strangeness is still handled by putting it in first inversion, and so handled it returns to duty as a substitute for the 5 chord. To properly generalize, to make our list of rules as simple as possible, we'll pull out the caveats about using the first inversions of diminished and augmented chords and make a standalone rule. Diminished and augmented chords should only appear in first inversion. With that extra rule, the result is an exact symmetry between our rules for the major keys and our rules for the minor keys, and that symmetry appears whether we are using the regular minor scale or the one with the raised 7th. We'll round out our discussion of the minor keys with 2 bits of jargon introduced solely for precision and to save some breath, and some advice about using the minor keys. We've been calling it the regular or normal minor key when you don't raise the 7th, when you just use the notes generated by our basic pattern. The technical term for this is the natural minor. You know, the one you naturally get when you apply the pattern. When you raise the 7th, that gives you a better harmony, so that kind of minor key is called the harmonic minor. Now we don't have to keep fumbling around with regular or normal or usual or with the scale you get when you raise the 7th. Natural minor, harmonic minor. The meaning of the terms should be obvious just from the adjectives. You'll sometimes see reference to a third kind of minor, the melodic minor, which lives in textbooks and is completely horrible. My only comment on the melodic minor is a 2-part pragmatic suggestion. First, don't worry about it. Second, when writing progressions in a minor key, feel free to move between the natural and harmonic minor versions of the key. The harmonic minor sounds better in cadences, but when you're not making cadence, the natural minor is perfectly acceptable. Use your ear in particular cases to decide whether you want to use the raised 7th or not.